A missing guard, a dead inmate, a prison scandal. Who knows what actually happened here? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Jyn Rich. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new to my channel, I tell multiple true crime stories on this channel every single week. So if you're into that kind of thing, feel free to subscribe, give this video a like so it gets pushed out to more people. And if you want to, you can follow me over on one of my two TikTok pages. Both are true crime related, but they will be posted in the link tree in the description of this video below. The links will also pop up here at some point in the beginning and at the end of the video. Why did I say end of the video? I don't know why I did it that way, but anyway. Yeah, feel free to follow if you want to. You don't have to, but it's there if you want. And then there is currently an issue with, I sell merch, but there's an issue with the merch page right now. I've been talking to Adam. He's the one who makes and ships all my merch. He's trying to figure out what the heck's going on with the site, the Etsy shop, but normally I sell merch. So right now, at the time of me making this video, there's an issue with it. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me an email. My email is listed below. Just email me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I have over 5,800 names on that list, so it may be quite some time before I get to that one, but I will get to it eventually. I pick my cases at random. So anyway, let's get into today's case. Weird, Mike. Yep. The heart of this story appears to be central at Frontera Prison, which is a women's prison about 45 miles south of Los Angeles, California. Back in 1984, at least, it was considered one of the largest women's prison in the entire country. I'm not sure what the status of that is now, but it is a maximum security prison, and this was home to some of the most vile and violent female prisoners in the country. But not all of them were, monstrous murderers and things like that. However, in the early 90s, what Frontera Prison ultimately became known for is a massive scandal that involved drug trafficking and over 30 dead prisoners over the course of a decade. And it was also linked to the disappearance of a prison guard. Allegedly, there were guards and prison officials who were directly involved in trafficking drugs, sexually assaulting prisoners, being violent towards prisoners. And there were two very distinct and different cases that occurred linking to this prison that really kind of blew everything up. The first one was Jyn Rich. She was a 35-year-old divorced mother to two young children who was living in Riverside, California, but was working as a prison guard there at Frontera Prison. She was a very by-the-book and respected prison guard there. She was well-liked by the majority of her co-workers, and she was well-liked by the majority of the prisoners there. Jesslyn was a prison guard who was actually there to perform her actual duties and doing what she was actually supposed to be doing, and she does not get involved in the drama, the politics, and all of that. She was also studying criminology by doing night classes at a local college. She was a straight A student doing this. She got a 4.0 GPA while doing this. She loved her two kids. She would never just pick up and leave them. And she was starting to get more money during this prison guard work, and she was really pushing to get promoted to sergeant, and she may have been on her way to that. But all of that would kind of go completely away on the night of November 11th, 1984. That night, according to Jesslyn's friend Marilyn Alt, they went to a bar called Charlie's Wild West Saloon in Orange, California, a place they had gone to frequently. Marilyn and Jesslyn were accompanied by two other gentlemen who they knew, and they were just there having a good time, conversating, having a few drinks. Well, according to Marilyn, at one point, Jesslyn, she's staring towards the entrance of the saloon, and all of a sudden she appears to be just completely frozen in time. Jesslyn does. Her eyes widen as she's staring at the door. But her friend Marilyn never turns around to see who Jesslyn may be staring at. It appeared to her that someone walked in that Jesslyn saw that made her afraid, that freaked her out. And Marilyn, to this day, kind of regrets never turning around to see who she was staring at, because after like a minute or two, Jesslyn kind of just sort of zones back into the conversation and starts talking again. At around 8:30 p.m., according to Marilyn, Jesslyn gets up from the table and begins to walk towards the restroom. At this point, Marilyn does turn around and she kind of sees Jesslyn walk towards the corridor, towards the restroom, and then she kind of just fades away. And then Marilyn sees a male who she did not recognize, I guess, also walking towards or down that hallway towards the restrooms. From that point, nobody ever sees Jyn Rich ever again. Jesslyn walked towards the bathroom in a busy bar and is never seen again. Jesslyn got there in her own car. Her car was left in the parking lot. Back at home, Jesslyn's belongings were all there. Jesslyn had just purchased her car, by the way, and so why on earth would she just abandon it? She was, like I said, getting straight A's in her criminology classes, and she was well on her way to a better future in that regard, and she was looking for a promotion as a prison guard at Frontera Prison. There was no indications that this is someone who wanted to just pick up and abandon everyone and everything in her life. Everything was going good for her. And most importantly, she had 2 young children that she loved more than anything on this planet. And there's just no way she would just abandon them. But that seems to be kind of what police initially thought once Jesslyn was reported missing. Yeah, she just left on her own accord. We don't have any signs of foul play here. Her family and friends were trying to tell police that this was way out of character, that Jesslyn had to have been kidnapped or something, murdered, but police said we have no evidence at this point of a kidnapping or a murder. There did not appear to be any signs of a struggle inside the women's restroom or the men's room at the bar. There was no sign of a struggle outside the bar. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything, apparently. There were no large financial withdrawals from her bank accounts just prior to this, because a lot of times people will do that if they're planning on making themselves disappear. And also her bank accounts, credit cards have never been used ever since the moment she disappeared. Her social security number has never been used. She has never been spotted by anyone. And according to Jesslyn's family, the police really didn't interview anyone. They didn't question anyone. They didn't really do a thorough investigation. They kind of just, this is a 35-year-old woman who she wanted to leave on her own, and that's what it is. Well, her brother didn't believe that. Her family didn't believe that. They all knew Jesslyn and that she wouldn't do this. And so her brother would go to Jesslyn's home and just begin turning everything over, looking for any kind of clues or evidence as to what may have happened to her. And he is looking through a trash can and he notices that there appears to be something that has just been torn up to shreds. It was what looked like a letter in Jesslyn's handwriting. And so her brother took all of the scraps of this ripped up note, brought it back to his home, and like a puzzle, pieced it back together, taped it all back together nice and neat. And there was a pretty alarming letter. The letter was written by Jesslyn to another guard. It was addressed to another guard at Frontera Prison. And then if you turned it sideways, she wrote on the margins of the letter that she felt threatened and that anyone addressing the alleged drug trafficking allegations at the prison would be, quote, taken care of. To them, to her family at least, that sounded like, okay, she knew something about some illegal activities going on at this prison with other prison guards and prison officials. She felt that she may be killed or harmed if she comes forward with any information. And now suddenly she disappears. They brought this information to the police, but still they're like, we don't have any evidence of her being kidnapped or murdered, so eh. And so this disappearance of Jesslyn Rich just seems to be ignored by police initially, and they didn't really do anything about it. And then, fast forward a few years later, in the fall of 1987, there is an inmate at Frontera Prison named Terry Lucas. Terry was a former housekeeper who was at Frontera Prison because of a parole violation. While she was in prison, she was being treated for a tumor in her breast, and she had gone to the infirmary. In November of 1987, Terry Lucas was found dead in her cell. Terry Lucas was 25 years old at the time of her death. To one particular prison guard named Betty Thompson, Terry Lucas's death was extremely suspicious, very bizarre. Just a few days before Terry Lucas's sudden passing, Betty Thompson said that a male prison guard had begun to approach Terry Lucas's jail cell, and Terry seemed to be absolutely petrified of this particular prison guard. According to Betty Thompson, Terry Lucas wasn't afraid of anyone. She was a very outspoken and she just never seemed to be bothered by anyone except by this one male prison guard. And when Betty Thompson saw the fear in her eyes, this was like, whoa, this is very strange. So Betty Thompson kind of intervened as this male prison guard is walking towards Terry's cell and says, hey, you're not authorized to be here, because it was an unauthorized visit to this cell by this male prison guard. And Betty Thompson's like, get away. So she closes Terry's cell and locks it and makes the other prison guard go away. Once that prison guard leaves, Betty Thompson enters Terry Lucas's cell and says, hey, what's going on? This is not like you. According to Betty Thompson, Terry Lucas says she knows what happened to Jesslyn Rich, the prison guard who disappeared a few years prior. She says she knows the people behind it and she has the evidence to back it up. The following morning is when Terry Lucas was brought back into the infirmary for, I guess, to do a biopsy on the tumor she had in her breast. A couple of days after that, Betty Thompson sees Terry Lucas in, I guess, a cell in the infirmary, and she approaches Terry Lucas, and Terry is cold to the touch. That's because Terry Lucas is dead. The room itself, the cell in the infirmary that Terry was in, was like ice cold. So Betty Thompson tells the nurse that, hey, she's dead. Like, what the hell? Well, apparently it took a couple of days after that for anyone to even take Terry Lucas out of that cell, to take her body out. They just let her sit there dead for a few days. Betty Thompson would then be backed up by another prison guard, another female prison guard, who said that, like, the night prior to her finding Terry dead, she had been like walking the cells and saw Terry Lucas lying in the same bed in the exact same position she was found in when Betty Thompson found her. And then I guess, like, the night prior, they also passed by the cell and saw Terry Lucas just lying in the exact same position that she was eventually found in. So she had been dead for probably a couple of days. As a matter of fact, she may have been dead by the morning after she told Betty Thompson about Jesslyn Rich. Initially, the official who took Terry Lucas's body, and I guess this was the coroner or what official this was, but initially they said that this appeared to have been a murder. But then, several days after that, he changes his tune completely and says this was a death related to her breast tumor. Which is odd, because it appeared that Terry Lucas had a broken arm, and initially it's believed that she died from suffocation, probably by the pillow that was found underneath her head. The official also decided to say that Terry Lucas had not been dead for days, but she had been dead literally just moments before her body was found. Despite Betty Thompson and another prison guard stating that there was very obvious trauma on Terry Lucas's body and her eyes were like wide open, she was found dead. Betty Thompson was not going to change her story. She said, I know that Terry Lucas was likely dead for several days before I found her, and she probably died the morning after she confessed that she knew what happened to Jesslyn Rich. And that was the story she was sticking to. But according to Betty Thompson, she was grilled for like 6 to 10 hours by this sea of other prison guards and prison officials about, that's not what happened. But Betty Thompson wrote out what she thinks happened and she signed it. The prison guards, the main official, looked at it and ripped that up in front of her and said, that's not what you saw. This is what you saw, with a typed up note, and a note that was not what Betty Thompson said happened. This was clearly written up by the officials for Betty Thompson to sign and just lie. But Betty Thompson, after 6 to 10 hours of pressure and just being completely bombarded by these people and also being a little afraid, decided to sign that note. However, when she signed it, she signed at the very bottom that she had signed it under duress and that the statement in it is not true. Well, the prison officials then saw that, ripped that up in front of her again. And then eventually, there were 4 more statements typed, and then eventually it was signed by Betty Thompson. But that signature was allegedly forged, that Betty Thompson never signed that final document. I guess the secretary or the clerk who worked at the prison said that they were told to type up this statement 4 times, 4 different times. And they saw somebody else sign the document, that it was not Betty Thompson who signed it. For the next 6 to 8 months, Betty Thompson is harassed and threatened by prison officials. One of them said to her, quote, "Thompson, if you don't learn how to do things in the proper manner, you'll end up dead alongside some muddy ditch," end quote. This was a threat given to her over the phone by a mysterious caller. Well, the following day after she got that phone call, she was at her job at the prison, and a superior officer came to her and out of nowhere asked her, "Hey, Thompson, have you had any threatening calls lately? Like, I don't know, being said you'll be thrown into a ditch, you know?" Which was creepy and bizarre to hear from her superior. At that point, Betty Thompson believed that it was probably this superior who called her and threatened her, and he wasn't hiding it. So yeah, like I said, for like 6 months, these threats kept happening, and then one night, she is pulling into her driveway, and all of a sudden, someone fires a gunshot right at her, and she manages to duck out of the way, and she doesn't get hit. She calls police to say, "Hey, someone just shot at me. I didn't see who it was. It was nighttime. It was dark." And I guess the next day, she gets another threatening call that says, "Next time, we won't miss." So it's believed that the prison guards, I'm not sure if prisoners were involved, but the prison guards were involved in some kind of large drug trafficking ring. Not to mention that over the course of a decade, 31 prisoners had died sort of mysteriously at the prison. And there were also a number of allegations that the male guards were sexually assaulting the female prisoners. And for a while, this seemed to be kind of kept under wraps. It was quiet. But when Jesslyn Rich disappeared, it kind of put a little spark into things. And then when Terry Lucas died, it became that spark turned into like a fire. And despite threatening other prison guards who were trying to expose what was going on to eventually squash this, it didn't work. Because by 1990 or 1991, there was like front page news about a scandal at Frontera Prison. These articles began to throw out these allegations of drug trafficking, of potential murders, sexual assaults, and an obvious massive amount of corruption going on at this particular prison. By this time, Betty Thompson feels a lot more safe because now everyone seems to know this blew up, and Betty Thompson and other guards will end up testifying at hearings with regards to the goings-on at this prison. A spokesperson for the California Department of Corrections would come out and say, quote, "I'm not saying the things people are alleging didn't happen. There's just no evidence to support them," end quote. Sounds pretty damning. 2 employees or prison guards who were directly named in these allegations. One was Lieutenant Carmen Juarez, and another one was named Hal Tanner. In 1987, a prison guard named Harold Dion Anderson, well, he was fired because he was forcing the prisoners to perform sexual acts on him. And some of the prison guards who witnessed this stuff were trying to go forward to say what was happening, but then they were getting threatening phone calls with regards to, not a prison guard who's doing this to the female prisoners. Another guard would come forward to state that they witnessed 2 inmates basically doing a drug exchange, and one of the named people in this, Carmen Juarez, was there during this drug exchange, and Carmen Juarez told the other prison guard, "Don't worry, they're with me." Once this prison guard who witnessed this tried to come forward, that prison guard got harassed and threatened. Someone actually cut their radiator hose in their car. And that guard eventually quit her job and was eventually diagnosed with having PTSD and paranoid thoughts with regards to someone coming after her, and she even attempted to end her own life. It was Carmen Juarez, who was the prison official, who told the prison clerk to type up the statement that allegedly was given by Betty Thompson 4 different times. And I think it was Carmen Juarez who was seen signing the document, forging it as Betty Thompson. In December of 1990, Carmen Juarez was arrested and charged with basically attempting to harass witnesses and preparing false statements. And she eventually would plead guilty and got 2 years probation for it, not actual prison time. And that was it for her. And no other prison guard and no other prison official, despite all of this information coming out, was ever held accountable for any of their actions. Even the guard who got fired for forcing, these to perform sexual acts on him, he wasn't held responsible under the law. None of them have ever been charged in Terry Lucas's suspicious death, and none of them had ever been charged with the disappearance of Jesslyn Rich. And the reason why none of them were ever charged with connections to Jesslyn Rich's disappearance is because Jesslyn Rich was, in fact, found. On December 5th, 1984, in a drainage ditch, there were dismembered body parts of a female found. This was in San Bernardino County. This is just a couple of weeks after Jesslyn Rich disappeared from the bar. According to officials, these body parts were identified as belonging to Jesslyn Rich. This is before DNA technology. Those remains that were found were cremated, so they cannot be tested anymore. And here's the kicker. When I say they were identified as Jesslyn Rich's remains, they weren't identified right away in 1984. They were identified in 1992, many, many years after those parts were already cremated. How did they identify them as hers? Because the body parts that were found were a leg, an arm, and a hand. There was no head found, so they couldn't visually identify the remains that way, like they couldn't do dental records. And once they identified the remains in 1992, in July of 1992, they said, well, we know who killed her. It was a man named David Daniel Ribis, R-I-B-I-S. David was a paroled convict. He had violent offenses, and he was someone who worked at the saloon where Jesslyn had last been seen alive. He apparently had been questioned a couple of times by police after she was reported missing, and according to police, he was a suspect for years, despite them not really ever saying that she actually was a victim of any foul play. So according to Marilyn, the friend who was at the bar with her, she saw David Ribis there that night, and at one point he was laughing with Jesslyn and actually put his arm around her and everything. According to police, another witness would come forward sometime later to state that they think they saw Jesslyn Rich in the back of David's car with a blanket over her, and she wasn't moving, and this was the night that she would have disappeared. You want to know how they had actually linked this to him and probably why they identified those body parts as hers? Well, because in October of 1990, David, he conveniently died. He died of a heart attack at the age of 45. According to police, David's family said that David confessed to killing Jesslyn Rich the night that she disappeared. According to David's family, David said that Jesslyn left the bar with him willingly. They went back to his place where he made sexual advances towards her, and she said no. They got into a fight. He then got her into his car. They drove to a remote location where he shot her in her head. Can't confirm this because 1, her head wasn't found, and 2, she was cremated. When this information came out, the police would claim they also had other witnesses come forward to say that David allegedly confessed to them as well. It all sounds, and I hate to be like this conspiracy theorist person because I hate that, but it does sound all just sounds so convenient that the man dies in 1990, and then 2 years after his death, they finally announced that, oh yeah, we found her back in 1984, but they didn't identify her until 1992. And then how did they identify her without a head, without the use of DNA? And they cremated her, so they can't even test the DNA anymore. So how did they do it? How did they identify her? That's the question. Jesslyn's family doesn't believe that was Jesslyn. And honestly, how can we even be for sure it was her? They don't have that physical evidence to prove with a 100% certainty that those remains were hers. Did David kill somebody else and kill her and dispose of her body, chopped her up and everything? And now they're just taking now the police saying, oh, that had to have been Jesslyn. We'll just say it was Jesslyn. But I don't know, something sounds off with it. This could be the case. It could be that David was actually her killer and the whole prison scandal had nothing to do with Jesslyn's disappearance and murder. It could just be that, it could just be a completely different scenario. And Terry Lucas's death was maybe tied to the prison thing, but not Jesslyn. But there are a bunch of questions though, right? I mean, there's a lot of unresolved things to this. You can't question David because he's dead. And the biggest question is, how do we know that those remains were Jesslyn's? And we'll never know that. We'll never know. And no one was held accountable at that prison. It just sounds like something shady is going on. Something shady did go on. And was Jesslyn killed because she was going to reveal what she knew about the drug trafficking at the prison? And somehow the police are involved in this scandal, perhaps, and they're just helping cover up this murder. Perhaps, or it could be completely unrelated to the prison. Perhaps. This is an unsolved mysteries case that we will never actually know the answers to. I'm pretty confident about that. I mean, unless someone comes forward directly from the prison who worked there and said, yes, I was the one to kill her. This is one of the answers will never be 100% certain. We have an answer, but is it the right one? And what about Terry Lucas? Why did she have a broken arm? How did she die exactly? They never really would come forward with that. Sounds like they're trying to hide that too. How come none of these prison guards were held accountable for being involved in drug trafficking at the prison and for sexually assaulting prisoners and for all of these mysterious deaths at this prison? Is that just how it goes? I mean, is that the way of the world? Powerful people get away with things because they're powerful? Yeah, probably. But Terry Lucas and Jesslyn Rich, I mean, even if the remains that they found weren't Jesslyn's remains, let's be real here. I think we can all agree that she is probably dead. But it's just frustrating that these two women died, probably for trying to expose the truth about shady goings on. And Terry Lucas and Jesslyn Rich did not get the justice they deserved and probably will never get the justice they both rightfully deserve. But that is sadly it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give the video a like so more people can see it if you want to. Follow me over on TikTok if you want. And recommend a case to my email address that is listed below. And yeah, that is it. My camera is flashing at me. I do not want to replace the battery just to make a silly, crazy outro. So I am just going to say toodaloos and goodbye blues. Toodaloos and goodbye. Oh, look at that. I still made it kind of uncomfortable for everyone involved. Yeah.